Especially when somewhere.
I'm Tom, I'm Mary.
Hi. I've been struggling with your speaker now.
This should work.
Hello. There's a point, Mary, of a short centering. So, like indicate that, you know, kind of whatever we've said to the center. Okay. Okay. And there might be one later, but you should definitely, in the 6-point unit,
Whenever you're
center go with it. Okay, okay.
Hi.
Okay.
Good to see you.
Good morning. I'm Tom.
Where you out
Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Hello, Joe. How are you?
Good.
Are you still celebrating your birthday?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I've forgotten about that already.
Well, she celebrates hers all year long, huh?
Ah.
When Vanessa comes, she wants her to sit over here, so I'll move over.
Oh, no, you know, Joanne, it's okay. I mean, she can sit with Donna and see.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, or you've got a chair there.
Oh, the little, to take, you want a pen? Before we start, I'll put some pens out, so, now,
Oh, no, I was putting them together.
Okay.
How are you? Yeah. I didn't know what
right, that's it, we'll share.
No.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much. Okay.
You were like yourself last week?
I was supposed to go to work for about an hour and it ended up being 9 hours.
That's
nice popularity. So I didn't make it. Well, I'm sitting in somebody's place. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I'm over here. I'm just strewn all over the place.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sitting right here so that I can please the listeners. Good morning, good morning. How many of you are here for the first time? Yeah, let's raise your hand here for the first time.
Nicely.
Second time, okay. As you know, various Sundays, we have people come in and speak and do sermons. And what we're trying to do is get all of the members of our UCM family to come in and do a sermon. We have all this wonderful talent, wonderful spiritual beings who've been kind of sitting in the back. So what I've been doing is that I'm bigger than most of you. I've been doing a little intimidation, you know. I come up and say, you will speak for church. And poor Mike, he just kind of went, I what? But he said, okay. And we have Christina's going to be coming in. Brenda is going to be coming in. We have a lot of brand new ministers who are going to be coming in and doing sermons. And I know you're going to be treating them nicely and all of that. And this morning, something I want to mention, I had a client call me 2 days ago. She said, what happened? I woke up this morning and I felt okay. And I said, what happened is all the people who were holding their breath over the war let out a sigh. And that collective sigh went around the planet. And so many of you who a whole month has been just, you couldn't understand why, probably around Friday you woke up going, even though it's kind of miserable weather, I feel good. And so when you're intuitive, as each one of you is in this room, you're going to sense that the world letting go. And even though there's a lot of stuff still going on, we have a sense that a lot of things are improving. So we want you to all feel that sigh. And so we know that how we have helped manifest this is through our prayers and through the work that we as light workers do. And in doing that, it's about making yourself feel wonderful about helping the planet, okay? And so what I want you all to do is stand up and go around the room, introduce yourself, welcome people, especially Leah who's new, and say, you are a light worker, okay? There you go. You are a light worker.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. And you dropped your beats.
I want to get to you, Joe. I know you're a light worker, Joe. Good to see you. Good to see you here.
Good morning, Joe. You're a light worker.
Thank you.
Touchy-feely thing. Hi, Joe.
Hi.
You are a light worker. It's wonderful to see you.
Another hug.
Oh, beautiful. 'Cause
Seems like we have a lot to be thankful for.
Yeah. good. Oh, that's amazing.
Did you notice it warming up in here? All this light shining, light it is. And this morning we have another fantastic light worker. Lynn Rogers does so much on the planet with helping people, teaching people, and just being herself. And so I want to thank her, Lynn Rogers, for being here.
Well, thank you, Garry.
And besides that, she remembers the 60s.
There you go.
She lived in
And she even wrote about it.
Kathryn, I know, you know, that's what they say. If you remember the 60s, you really weren't a part of it, you know? But you don't remember.
Well, welcome to our Sunday talk on 60s values for today. Today's Passion Sunday also, and it's the last week of Lent in Christianity, the week before the crucifixion and the resurrection of Christ. And I was at one point going to talk about personal tests during this time, but the flow of events led me back to that original talk.
Which meant Dottie's memory thing.
In the 60s, we learned to go with the flow. So, and part of the 60s was using our creativity in spontaneous ways, and I think that's a legacy that we have today. I've been thinking about it this week and noticing there's so many commercials that you see for allergy commercials with people with flower power clothes and long hair, and a lot of the values have just naturally permeated our culture, you know, from that time. But I was interested after the fact on wondering how the Christian mystical journey of Jesus, who in a way was the first rebel, kind of a rebel against the government. I mean, he certainly had was crucified partly because of his stand for peace, how this could connect. And so we kind of want to weave today the theme of Passion Week and deriving values from the 60s and the Franciscan time that followed it and connecting those things today. I'm with my friend and church soloist, Kathryn Derby, who doesn't want me to say that she's I can't say that. And she grew up in the same place that I did, and some of her experiences are reflected also in that book, but I won't tell you whose. There are many people's experiences in the fictional character, Carolyn Ryder. I did just write and publish a book about that time called Born in Berkeley, and we'll be reading from that today. It was published by Inkling Press in the fall. So we want to weave the themes of Passion Sunday and the 60s together. And I wanted to start out about a little bit about what Edgar Cayce said about Jesus and who Jesus was. Edgar Cayce said Jesus was the man who became the Christ consciousness through his own personal tests for many lives that he overcame. And if we look at Jesus that way, I think he has a lot more meaning for us. I had been part of the Menlo Park Presbyterian Church, and I completely rejected it until I read Jeffrey First's story in, I think, as a teenager, probably 1969, the story of Jesus. And I'd come out of a lot of those heavy-duty 60s experiences where I was often the youngest person, 15 years old, and all these things going on around me, some of which were good and some of which were very harrowing. And I found a lot of answers in Edgar Cayce, America's Presbyterian Sunday school, great clairvoyant mystic of our time. Jeffrey first collected the readings on that and said that Jesus was a person who maybe had lived before in his growth toward Christ consciousness and was a way-shower along with his soulmate, the beloved Mother Mary. That made sense to me because it wasn't like a Sunday school figure who was all sweetness, who came and died for an hour. And I know his death was terrible, but there are terrible deaths beyond even his death on earth. And suddenly his pattern of expression made sense to me. So we are now in a time of testing in the world, right? And we are trying to give birth to this fabled new millennium of peace on earth, the Aquarian age. But we're in that transitional birth pang period. And this was the period of Jesus' time also. Anytime the world is in transition, like it is on this Passion Sunday, we have to call to the wisdom of the past to help us reach for new values. Edgar Cayce also said that, and some may accept this, some may not, that Jesus could have lived before, coming from ancient Atlantis as Rom the Atlantean, flying by ship into India to bring the wisdom of Atlantis into the Indian land. And there he met his soulmate Mary. She was the daughter of a native priest, and her name meant born in a furrow, almost a goddess kind of figure. And they came together, but she was taken away by pirates and taken off into the woods in the Indian myth of Sita. And when she returned, she had a young son, who was really Ram's son, but he was so jealous about this that it caused an estrangement, and she threw herself into a burning pyre. And I bring this up only to say that possibly even Jesus, who became the Christ, had suffered through some of the tests and the woes of this world. And then as Hermes, the great black mystic of Africa, who was brought by Isis and Rata into Egypt 10,000 years before our time, 11,000 years now. He was a great mystic, and he is part of even some of the Rosicrucian teachings today derived from Hermes, who said, for example, that in astrology he said that water is actually masculine and earth feminine, which is kind of neat, and air is feminine, like the Aquarian age, and fire masculine. So he had some neat slants that I think we can still learn from. But there was racial prejudice coming into Egypt at that time, and they were trying to perfect the perfect body and stuff. And here comes this huge, beautiful black man into Egypt. And he was scorned a bit by others in this time of the beginning of racial prejudice, so he turned to food to comfort himself. And then as Joseph, Cayce said he lived as Joseph in the Hebrew land, who was sold into slavery by his brothers, and when they later needed food and guidance from him, as he was in a power position in Egypt, he made them briefly bow down before him, which was the ego and pride that kept him just a little bit from the Christ consciousness. And how many of us have some trait, desire, feelings, behavior that's keeping us a little bit from the goddess and Christ consciousness? We all have that. So when Jesus then had to go through Holy Week, it made sense to me that when the angel, when Shayatin, which the Zoroastrians say rather than Satan is the shadow of us, the Shayatin, the shadow side, tempted him with all his past life weaknesses, said, well, we can turn these rocks into food. So then he could kind of do his overeating thing, and that might help with all the tests he had to face. Or we could have everybody bow down to you as the king. So that would take care of that Joseph and that Ram power. You could be born from the housetop, like Ram coming in from Atlantis. And he had to turn some of that down to reach for a new value, but he was being tested. And so he chose in the Cayce tradition a greater path. He overcame death, and he helped show the way to others through and out of ascending from this plane, how to be resurrected in the Christ spirit of love and peace and justice. In Palestine at the crucifixion time, and 10,000 years later, at the time of St. Francis of Assisi and St. Clare, we have his image here. people were still searching for, to find a way to live out this Christ message. And the young people in Assisi were a lot like the young people in the San Francisco Bay Area. They had affluence. Here our parents had gone through World War II, and they'd given all these wonderful things that allowed the children to be able to question some of the negative things, like worshiping the material things or the racial issues that were in our country. So the St. Francis and Clare, friends in Italy 1,000 years ago, gave up their parents' rich cloth of gold business, and they took on the simple clothes of beggars, and they decided to try to live out Christ's message. And they wore sandals, and they decided to go on the road, and they decided to live simply. And in the 60s, before that, the Beat generation, there were people who wanted to do the same thing, who wanted to throw off, making it in corporate America and maybe do a gardening business and throw off some of the privileges perhaps that had been given to them. Maybe they had the leisure to do it, and to try to live in this simple and spontaneous way. But tests came into it. There were certainly abuses of the time. There were extremes of substance abuse, extremes in sexual experimentation, all of which I tried to address in this story. So, in a sense, they were being tested as Jesus was in his time. I want to read just a little bit about this. Yes. Oh yeah, Kathy has a biblical quote that ties into it.
Ties into it too, in Mark, chapter 6, verse 7. And he called to him the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2. He gave them authority over the unclean spirits. He charged them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not to put on 2 tunics.
So Born in Berkeley is a memory, paraphrasing, of this pivotal time, written as fiction. It has true facts. After the Beats and before the hippies were named, there were neighborhoods like in this one, like Tupper's Park, that sprang up in our area. The term beat came from the New Testament Beatitudes, which spoke of living simply. The meek shall inherit the earth. Beaten down by materialistic white American culture of the 40s and early 50s, beat outsiders wrote poetry to the beat of Negro hipsters' music. Meanwhile, the World War II couples gave their kids a lot: patriotic ideas, the leisure to question, but the cultural pendulum had swung too far. And a small percentage of youth born into suburban security threw off their advantages and privileges, very like the youth of 12th century Assisi, Italy, following Saints Francis and Clare, after whom San Francisco and Santa Clara are named. The Assisi youth threw away their parents' cloth of gold, cut their hair in this case, and took to the road, following Christ's beat message. So now through literature and song, in a moment, we hope to help you glimpse some of these values that we might reach for today, especially as we're being tested so much in the world. And Mary's going to help us get centered around that. She didn't know that.
We're going with the flow today, Mary.
We're going with
That's
the
right.
flow.
That's part of what we're trying
Can we
to
shuffle the lights?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So for those of you who are new, and those of you who have not experienced what we call our centering, what we like to do is to sit comfortably and just follow your breath for a few minutes. For your breath is the very essence of your life. And as you follow your breath, you do go with the flow. And you feel the flow of life coming through you, renewing you, balancing you. And you realize that you are an essence of being, and that you have the ability, not just through your intellect, but through your very cells, to experience the different times and the different places. And so you are able to reach for peace. Peace in our time, peace in times to come. Drawing from the desires of peace in the past. And you just feel that for a moment. So that your entire body flows with you as we move into the music and the thoughts of the rest of the message. And as you're comfortable, you can return to this place with Lynn. And let us know you're returning by opening your eyes.
So we're going to talk about 4 important values that we can draw from that time. And the first one is about justice for those who don't have a voice. And Matthew Fox, whom I studied with in graduate school at Holy Names College, who's a great Catholic mystic of our time, a wonderful person of the earth, he said, for one thing, he said that the goddess and the cosmic Christ are the same thing. I thought, that's just wonderful, isn't it? That's why the Office of Inquisition asked him to leave. He's now a crazy And he talked about something called Anawim. And Anawim are people who were living things that have no voice. And Kathy and I were talking about driving by Agnew this morning, how relieved I was as a mother that Agnew, of a special child, that Agnew was closed, because it used to be a ghetto where people left off special people, and sometimes they suffered abuse, and sometimes they longed for their families. And so a developmentally delayed person is an Anawim, a voiceless one, who cannot voice their own voice. So in the 60s, there was a thrust for justice for people who didn't have a fair voice. From Born in Berkeley, chapter 2, paraphrasing a little bit, Emma told me about Quaker meetings in Palo Alto where I heard long-haired young students sing folk songs about peace. They needed fundraisers to help Negroes vote down south. Having been trod on by my mother, I identified with the Negroes' plight right away. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee appealed to me. Hovering between religion and rebellion, I found an answer, a way of doing something good for those on the fringes of society. SNCC raised money for the civil rights workers in the South. We learned Negro voting rights activist James Meredith was wounded by gunfire on a Mississippi highway, and how a worker from Mississippi gave a speech at the university my parents had attended. UC Berkeley administrators prevented students from collecting money for civil rights workers. In a fiery speech, Mario Savio said, "There is a time when operation of the machine becomes so odious, it makes you so sick to heart, you can't take part." I joined the committee that first night and found an identity at once amongst the idealistic sons and daughters of Stanford professors more concerned about racial injustice than shopping. A Negro leader from East Palo Alto spotted me as a spokesperson for the cause. Weeks later, I hitchhiked home from a Presbyterian ski trip to work at a fundraiser at the American Veterans Hall in Redwood City. We took up the microphone and convinced, we hoped, World War II vets to give their Negro brothers down in Selma, Alabama, a real chance to participate in our great country you saved from the enemy overseas. You helped free the Jewish people, we said, from the concentration camps. Let's free our Negro brothers and sisters to vote. And hopefully you'll join with us in this song. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe we of like mind to overcome injustice and war led some to also to give up materialism for the simple joy of living, and to, like Francis and Clare in the 12th century, to take to the road. So the value that we're talking about now is that of giving up materialism for the mystic's joy of being in the moment. From Born in Berkeley, chapter 4, the character now is going to a very pivotal concert in the 60s at Esalen in Big Sur. Satisfied, I clambered up from the very edge of the cliff to the grassy knoll and headed toward the lodge to watch the influx of arrivals to the Baez concert. Beaded youth, young men and women from all over California streamed down around a radiant God's Eye swimming pool, shaped swimming pool, and we have one of those here, like the God's Eye or a dream catcher today. Below the rustic lodge and above the breathtaking Big Sur Sea. Those who had crashed along the road in redwoods, or like me, who had slept in isolated pastures of grass, were the first to emerge. Joining them were flute-playing, sandaled youths with bells and eucalyptus and red Indian saris, and hash and reefers and girlfriends and boyfriends, and occasionally a baby or dog. A sense of responsibility and purity of heart flowed with them. They clotted the knoll at Esalen before the concert began. And then bursting from a shiny, narrow sports car came Baez, the magnificent, the queen. She was the lady, the legend of the hour. Before Baez played her guitar and sang, the dulcimer tones of Baez's sister, Mimi, and Mimi's husband, Dick Farina, floated over the grounds. I felt my heart would break. I felt fed, healed, hushed, okay, beautiful, amid the strains of the dulcimer. The crush of the now packed crowds of daring, seeking spirits who came to see Joan, Malvina, Pete, Mimi, and Dick, so young he would soon be dead, weave the mystery of sea and sky and protest against all cruel wrongdoing into a celebration of these emerging 60s. But then I was only a child, or was I? Only an onlooker, too young. No, I felt 100 years old, good here. I sucked the sea in sounds until later the fine rising ocean spray washed me clean enough of all the hurt, so that on happy instinct I decided, after the concert, to move up the road with the rush of people and follow them into the future, wherever they might go. I would not go home. I would hitchhike away, down the road, and follow that beat.
On Saturday morning, I'm going away with my friend. Will Saturday spend till the end of the day? Just me and my friend. We'll travel for miles on our Saturday smile, and then we'll move on. But we will remember long after Saturday's gone.
Well, they found themselves coming back from being on the road, called back to protest the pain of war. And we're talking about the third value, which is standing for peace. From Born in Berkeley, chapter 8, page 51. The anti-Vietnam Day rally at last. The first anti-Vietnam march, a swirling human spiral, swept the streets with new hope. At the rally, the folk singers had sung about how from the beginning of time, warmongers each believed they had God on their side. They'd sung about Germans and Russians and ourselves, each hating the other, pointing out the irony of each one being right, gently denounced the concept of war. Today, pushed ahead by the others in the front row, I knew we were right. This night, we had God on our side. By the next day, I was convinced we had changed the entire world. I was dismayed when the San Francisco Chronicle said there were only 3,000 of us. We knew there had been 10,000 or more, but by now we were learning the establishment lied. But it brought a surge of feeling. Over the next year, we would find courage to do the unexpected, create more radical rallies at what would become People's Park at Mace, Some UC Berkeley students would follow Mario Savio, sacrifice study time, demonstrate at Sproul Hall. Others would be regulars at the Anti-Vietnam Day Committee. Some of us would be clubbed outside the Oakland Induction Center. And worse than this, many of our contemporaries would die or develop post-traumatic stress syndrome for much of their lives in their service in Vietnam, and some were cruelly jailed. And as we hear this next song, we can be thinking of not only people who've sacrificed themselves for something they believed in that time, but it's so appropriate, the song, as we think of Passion Week. Today, people fled from some of these trials into the human arms of love and friendship. It was love and friendship from the heart, and certainly not just from convention then. From Born in Berkeley, chapter 17, page 124. Now at the end of my time with him, I stayed at his new place. He played songs about how we are but a moment's sunlight fading in the grass. Magnificent jewels of rain pelted the house, and I thought we were mere shadows, unfilled forms, waiting for the substance of the people we would become, and waiting for the people we would one day love. You do everything right, he said, but at the wrong time. He looked at me quizzically. When you're older, you'll be okay. You'll be great. In the morning, I headed out toward the white, glimmering rain, fresh street. I gave him one sweet kiss and didn't leave a poem, and he didn't advise me as to my youthful mistiming, but he looked sad. The song about the evening of the day, watching children play, smiling faces I can see, but not for me, played on his clock radio, played through the great bay window while I left. I never saw him again, but neither forgot. These are some of the values of the 60s. The value of justice for those who don't have a voice. The value of giving up materialism for the simple joy of living and following the saints before us onto the road of life. The value of protesting the pain of war and standing for peace. The value of love and friendship from the heart, not just convention, as well as the value of creativity and going with the flow. Today, as in the 60s, the world is being tested. And in Jesus and Mary's time, Casey said it was a very dark time on earth, and that's why the Essenes helped prepare for Jesus to come in. Jesus, according to Edgar Casey, was part of a group effort of consciousness, much like we're here today as a group. So these Essene priests and priestesses were attempting to lift the energy of the world and manifest that Christ awareness. And at any time, like now in 2003, before a new great awareness comes to earth, then there are birth pangs. It can be a dark time. Mothers giving birth, even if they have a birth coach, oftentimes at the very last minute when the baby's about to be born, that's the time they want to throw it all in and give up, just before the baby crowns to birth. In this Passion Week, reminiscent of our darkest tests on earth, we can draw inspiration from those who have risen through tests and reached new values. From the 60s, we certainly can reach for a rebirth of justice, of peace, of charity, of real love and compassion and human values over war and over the worship of things. we were talking the other evening at Reverend Tom's and Mary Garry's home about what's happening in the world, and not everyone has all the answers. There's a kind of a heavy leaning maybe amongst us in one direction, but even those of us that came from the 60s with strong radical leanings, like myself, are really confused at times, because there do seem to be moments of value on both sides of the question. And what came to me in a meditation at our Wise Women Circle we have on Thursday nights, and Gail has been the longest member of that, was the message when we were meditating the other night that out of all the efforts will come this new millennium. I mean, the consciousness of peace in the streets, and maybe even some of the movement away from people who dictate and oppress the feminine in their countries, out of all of it may be born peace in a way that we just don't know at this point. So we can draw from these values of the past toward going on our own road as the poor beggar for Christ, which meant that every day we would have our bowl and take simply the experiences given to us, just as the Bible passage of Mark suggests. And that we would know that at times, like Christ in Holy Week, we would meet pain and tests from the past as we walk in this path of the way shower, learning to overcome the necessity of even death itself. And now we'd like to share a special song that we had prepared before for the Passion Week, and this is a wonderful treat for us because it's a very fine classical piece drawn from the 12th century called The Crucifixion.
This particular piece was written in this century by Samuel Barber, but the poetry for this very powerful song was written by a cloistered monk who lived nearly 1,000 years ago during the time of St. Francis of Assisi. And it depicts a very human Jesus who, during the moments of his most extreme torment, was able to transcend his suffering and feel the compassion for the suffering of another.
Tune for the energy of passion.
At the cry of the first bird, they began to crucify thee, O swan. Never shall the lament cease because of that. It was like the parting of day from night. Oh, sore was the suffering borne by the body of Mary's Son. But sorer still to him was the grief for which his sake came upon his mother.
Remember what Edgar Casey said, Christ is not a man, Jesus in one incarnation, Joshua in another, Melchizedek in another. Jesus was the man, Christ the messenger, Christ in all ages, Jesus in one. He said Jesus is the man, the activity, the mind, the relationship that he bore to others. Yea, he was mindful of friends. He was sociable. He was loving. He was kind. He was gentle. He grew faint. He grew weak, and yet gained that strength which he has promised in becoming the Christ by fulfilling and overcoming the world. You are made strong in body, in mind and soul, in that purpose by power in Christ. The power then is in the Christ, The pattern is in Jesus. And now with Passion Week coming upon us, we can draw from those who went before, who were tested before us. We can bring values from Palestine, from Franciscan times, from the 60s for today. And I wanted to initiate a moment of silence where we can reflect a little bit on our own tests and trials, where we can draw on the Christ Spirit within and for healing, for values from Palestine. We can find out where we're a vanguard, willing to take a stand to change this world. And so let's let ourselves go within and, Mary, can you take us a little bit more within so we can split this?
I will.
Tom, please.
Please take a deep breath and allow yourself to move more fully into the spiritual awareness of your own being. And as we've experienced both the music and the words and the spirit that has been brought to us, perhaps just for myself, but in my mind's eye, I saw others joining us in this gathering. And they came from groups from the 60s, maybe from the 20s, from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. I felt the presence of spirits coming because they had sown the seeds of unity, of idealism, of universal freedom and equality, because they had worked passionately to create these things in their life. Oftentimes, as Lynn said, no small sacrifice to themselves. It's an ongoing process. Sometimes when we look at a process, we become frustrated and disappointed because we don't see the end that we have in mind. But no good thought and no good deed goes without completion in some form or another. No prayer rightly said, no affirmation rightly held goes without fulfillment in this plane. And so as I visualized in my mind's eye these various groups coming to join us, even to those victims who may have passed in this war on both sides, the Arab, the American, British, the Australian, whatever their origin, and those who have died through other challenges. Those spirits came to us, I think, seeking the light in these things, the light created by the words, the music, the thought, vibration, inspiration that's been offered to us this morning. It is a bit of potpourri to mind and spirit. May we have been blessed, greatly blessed. Let's take the energy that we've experienced here this morning and allow it to bring us comfort, bring us knowledge and understanding that right outcomes always come from right things, or things rightly done. Give thanks for the sacred intentions of so many who have gone before us, who've shown the way for us, be they saints or soldiers or political activists or people of social consciousness, world leaders or spiritual leaders.
So when you're ready, complete your reflection on these times of tests and trials and let yourself draw from the vanguards of the past to help point the way now. And gradually bring your attention back into the present moment. Join with us in another singing the song Martin Luther King loved so much. We shall overcome. since we have a little more time, I just wanted to open the completion of our sharing to you and to open a little bit of a discussion to you about what the images of those times and the subjects we've been discussing might have stirred for you and how you think we can draw from those values for today. And some people were there, so-called, we were all there one way or another, but does anyone want to share a little bit about how you relate to the values of those times? Some people that we've shared with before had been doing other things and were more mature at that time, were raising families or had participated in a different war, were curious about this particular movement. Some people were very young and not as aware of it, but interested in absorbing some of the values. Did anyone want to share with us?
I have something that just happened. I went in for an ultrasound at Kaiser Hospital, and I was wearing my tie-dye dress. And this woman looked at me, her name's Toy, and she said, "Are you a hippie?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "I just read about you in history books." She said, "Do you know how much you changed and helped us when we were in Vietnam?" And it was like, whoa. You know, and she went on and taught. I mean, she's a young woman, probably in her, probably in her 40s, but she could remember what was going on.
Growing up in Vietnam.
Growing up in Vietnam, and she felt that tie-dye met people that were helping them. And I
Really?
thought that's something we've never even
Interesting, yeah.
Oh, that they related to the
we related to the hippie movement, and so, she sat and talked to me, and people kept backing up wanting to get their ultrasound stuff. She told me all about her family and how she came over here, you know, and all that. And I thought, isn't that interesting that now it's a historical thing that people look at completely differently than they did at the time.
When I wear a tie-dye, everybody asks me if I'm a deadhead.
Oh, you can say,
I said, no, I'm a yes head.
but also raising children during that time.
raising children. Huh?
Yeah, during, my kids were 5 to 7, around that age during the 60s. And what we would do is we'd go to a lot of events, and finally after listening to Joe Diaz and Country John McDonald, and there was a big riot, and then the next weekend we went and heard Moby Grape and a bunch of other groups, and there was a big riot. And so my son came up and said, "Mom, can we go to a riot again next weekend?" Maybe these aren't quite the values that I'm looking for. It became a part of the music. And my one son does photography for rock groups, and he got so excited about that.
There are a lot of movies, if you get a chance to see, Susan Sarandon and Goldie Hawn, who are really even some of the people a little older than us that we wrote about in this character in the Banger Sisters. It's a great time to see how people took two different paths. Goldie Hawn sort of still there, living out that, and Susan Sarandon living out something different, and how they come to reconcile those values. It's a really cute film.
It is a good.
Very current, isn't it? Did you enjoy it?
It is.
Anybody else who wanted to share?
Yeah, I was 13 years old in 1969, so I
There
kind
you
of
go.
missed a lot of the peace movement and that kind of thing, except that I really did feel a part of it. When I was 13, I was in campfire girls and that kind of thing, so we were into the helping, and so we would do packages and so on to send to the soldiers in Vietnam. And we wrote letters, and I actually got a letter back that was, it all got printed in a local newspaper. And yet, my mother at that time was experimenting with trying to be a bit more of a hippie. Her boyfriend was a hippie. And so she was trying, that kind of an energy. And she would say, "Oh, I'm going to take you to see the Woodstock movie," which she never did. I had to wait till I was an adult before I saw Woodstock. But, what she did was she played in Hootenannies, and we used to play. And so I would play folk guitar with her. So we would go and we would play. And we did a lot of the Pete Seeger songs and Woody Guthrie, and would do a lot of music towards creating peace. And so I still felt like I was a part of that, and I learned value in my life of always that I wanted peace and brotherhood and friendship and sisterhood, and that was just always an energy that I felt all of my life. But to have grown up in that time period, and my next door neighbor was one of those really mellow people, and one of the first people that I ever knew whose kids called her by her first name instead of calling her mom or mommy, and she kind of became a second mom. So there was really a lot of that energy that was a part of my upbringing and a part of who I was, and so it was a very important time for me. And I think it established who I was all the way through my spirituality and so on.
Early on also did the same for me.
Yeah.
Anybody else who wants to share? Yes, and your name?
Christina, being not born in the sixties.
And what generation are you? Are you X? What do you think you are?
She's the Christina.
I'm the Christina generation.
Yeah.
No, I really feel like in some respects that I'm an incarnate of someone who was of that time.
Past life rebirth.
Oh, I've had several. I've had one there. I've on both sides, and so it's really interesting to, because my girlfriend calls me a hippie because I have a lot of the values and the aspirations of someone of that time, and thinking and hoping, like when you were saying about the time now and pulling from that and hoping that we can come to a peaceful state. And I'm like, wow, that is just so optimistic. Can I even feel that now? Because the way things are, it's hard to see the other side, but I definitely have the values of that time. And when I have children, I'll pass them on too. Even though I'm not actively participating out there, I'm actively participating here by healing myself so that I have something to offer.
Well, Edgar Casey described you. He said he and Madame Blavatsky, who was a theosophist, and several others said that there would be a group called the Sixth Root Race. It wasn't a physical race, it was a consciousness race, and they would be the sort of children of Jessica Madigan, my teacher, thought it was kind of like the children of the 60s people, or some were born around the time you are and on and beyond that toward now. And they, instead of having to sort of struggle as we did, being a little child in the 50s and stuff, and having to make that sudden shift and go through all the awkwardness of that period, that these people would be born not only with some of those values, but some of the spiritual values we've been all working since the 70s at least, or then, to open up, and that they would just sort of know that they lived before, and they would know they have a soulmate, and they would know certain things. And instead of like the serial monogamy and all the relationships that you saw in the 60s, they would have more of a knowing to find their right partner, their right work, theoretically. So you sound like you really reflect that. And I've done intuitive readings for young people here and there. I remember there was a young woman when I was in Virginia Beach in graduate school, and the niece of my friend Dr. Pam Bennett, whose dad, Harmon Bro, was friends with Casey, and her niece came, and she just, no one could understand her in the family. I mean, she was wearing long straight hair, she'd taken off with some kind of creepy older guy in a beat-up car. She's trying to drive to Mexico, and she, I mean, nobody could understand what was going on with her. And in the reading, it was like her life had ended midstream in that experience, so she was jumping back into it to kind of finish the experience. And it is true that we'll probably run into people, young men who were killed in Vietnam, some of the young men and women who had another kind of trauma. And as I tried to bring out underneath the character's experience, it may sort of seem hip, but there's a real anti-drug message in the sense that some of it, I think, was probably put in by contrary forces, some of the not so gentle stuff, to stop the movements for peace in a way. And that is my personal theory, that it may not be everyone's. And I think what happened is that people went through post-traumatic stress and some of the extreme parts of that. There are other people whose experiences were positive, but many were traumatized, just like in the Vietnam War. So people did sort of, some lost their lives even through in the drug experiences of the times, and Kent State and Vietnam, and could come back in the way that you described. So it certainly could be, and that's another important group, those coming in. And it seems like there are a lot of young people wandering around wearing the clothes, wanting to espouse the values, but until the events we've just had now, there has been no real rallying call in the world. And I thought when all this happened and we got, well, I confess my politics, but my president has been detained. Okay. I elected one who's just not here yet. He's been detained, and I'm waiting, and I don't really, well, anyway, mine has been detained, the one I voted for. But I had to say, well, why did the event swing the way that they did? And it really came to me at that time, there would be, as so many of us thought, it's to create a kind of movement and a rallying call, a rallying call. So, you express that. Anyone else who has a quite different thing to say than I might say, who wants to share?
I will.
Yes.
Being in the 60s, when I was to graduate, my draft number was 27.
Wow.
So when my folks told us, and they said, hey, you're going, so you might as well, you got your choice in the list or be drafted. So I enlisted in the middle of my senior year so I wouldn't be drafted. And in our neighborhood, I guess there was 5 guys that were killed. And these were guys that went ahead and were drafted. And then some of my best friends went to Canada, school, other places, and it was really hard going into the service and then coming back and being the shaved head and going to San Francisco to the parties there that they were going into and just not relating to it. You know, and just being in something where it comes from an environment where a dysfunctional family and religious, by their standards, in the Southern Baptist style, and then knowing that wasn't correct, and still searching. And you have these different conflicts of values, and then when you see these people that you grew up with, most of them, you know, you were fighting with in the block wars, you know, and with knife fights and everything else, and then you were going off and coming back and relating with them. You know, when you're going through this kind of experiences, it's just, you see these guys and what they go through. And I was lucky because I ended up spending 4 years in Sacramento.
You didn't run out, no?
No, when I was went in, it was, you went to Sacramento for 1 year and we got 18 days before I was to go to Thompson Newt, my orders were canceled.
Chill out.
And I was to go to Thompson Newt Air Force Base right before the Haddox. So it was like, you know, I was so fortunate not to. And then it was like, say, oh, well, I'll just re-enlist, it's so nice. But then they said, yeah, well, you're going to Vietnam. I said, wait a minute, I just made 4 years, and you tell me I'm going to go there again? And I said, I don't think so. But it just, you know, you see what these different things going on, and when you have friends of one set of values, and people that you work with another. And you watch these guys now when they're talking about, you know, they've been drilled, they've got those values, you know, where it's all gung ho, it's all go out there, and they're not their values. It's the people that they're with, it's the environment. And you just wonder when they come home, what are they coming home to? Because it is that when we came back, you know, that we were scum. And so there was no place for us. You know, just,
Yeah,
But it's different now, because everyone's supporting the troops. You hear everyone, people who even denounced the war are still supporting the troops.
it is
because
good.
I think that was a weakness of
Of the 60s.
the hippie movement or whatever. Obviously, I come from a different place. And it was very hard for me seeing soldiers who were sent there, mostly of color, who were drafted, having them come home from a god-awful experience, and having in my mind some rich kid who got to run off and play in San Francisco spit on them. I found that incongruent with the message. So I was not quite as positive about those experiences as some people might have been.
Yeah, and I raised 3 sons during the 60s, a widow, and my middle son was drafted in the Vietnam War, and he went over to Vietnam, and it hurt him tremendously when he came home after fighting over there. And he landed in Seattle Airport, and he was accosted, he and his group of men, at the airport, and they got in a big fist fight with it, but it was really made him feel bad because he was drafted, he was fighting over there and was told what to do and everything, and then come home and have the people greet him that way.
I think that not everybody recognized that it was not their fault. I think that that's kind of why I really appreciated the age that I was, because I saw it on both sides in a lot of ways. I was very supportive of those that had to be over there, and very supportive and happy when they came home, and, you know, yet did not want the war to be happening, because I didn't feel that it was something that should be happening, because that it wasn't my value to be out there and fighting. But certainly there was no blame. And it was, and I felt that it was a terrible thing, you know, even at a young age, as a young teenager, recognizing how they were treated when they were brought home. And I actually have been, you know, done volunteer work in different places and so on, to help people out and talk to them and be with them and to share their experiences, because they were very, very important as a part of that time as well, and was not their fault. And my son now talks to me as having a past life belief that he died in Vietnam. And he tells me he's a reincarnated yes man. He says, I have remembrances of hearing yes songs while I was there, and, you know, which, yes, was around in 68, 69. And he believes that he died in the very early 70s, which makes sense because he was born in 79 to me. So he also, I mean, even when we started talking about the possibilities of war, he used to come to me and go, I swear, Mom, if I get drafted, I'm moving to Canada. So I used to think, you know, wow, that's interesting that because I never spoke to him about that he would come to me and immediately say, I'm going to move to Canada because I don't want to fight, I don't want to hurt anybody, I don't want to do that again. That's interesting.
I think that's the difference for the people who did espouse those movements. There's a difference between being teenagers and what my daughter Megan calls middlescence, which is ungrown up, because you and Kathy are middlescent. But in that you begin to see both sides, and you really begin to respect the efforts of the soldiers in a way that you didn't as a teenager when you were making posters and putting a missile on LBJ's nose because you look like your dad, you know, stuff like that. So we've evolved as a people, and that may be part of the message we received the other evening, that both sides, you know, will lead us to peace somehow, the awareness of both sides. Did anyone else want to share before we complete?
Yeah, one thing that I read in the paper this week that I thought was kind of interesting. And first off, I'll say, in my opinion, we haven't changed enough. The American public needs to wake up. Because when the troops come home, if you really want to support the troops, and this is the part that I read in the paper, if you want to support them, then believe what they say when they don't feel good. Believe them. And do not allow the Bush administration or any administration to cut any veteran benefits at all. Those people have put their life, this is me speaking, they put their life on the line for us and for whatever we do. Whatever we do, whether it's good, bad, indifferent, whatever, everybody agrees with it, they put their lives on the line. Give them whatever they want. That's me speaking also. But that part about, you know, don't allow it, just don't allow it.
Thank you for sharing that.
I kind of looking at it in another point of view, Vietnamese point of view, from people from Vietnam. In my mobile home park, there's a lot of Vietnamese that just moved in there. I think we get about 50 or 60% of them are Vietnamese in there now. And there's some of them, you know, they're older people that were actually over in Vietnam during that time. And one of the persons came to me and said, you know, Vietnam was at war going back centuries and centuries and centuries. And after the Vietnam War, these people don't want war anymore. They're tired of it. They don't want it anymore. And it's like, you know, they're a bunch of peace activists over there. They're
Interesting to hear.
They're very peaceful people, and I've seen where veterans from here that went over and visited some of the people in Vietnam. Even like this one guy who killed this man, and he wanted to go over and he had a picture of his wife, and wanted to go over and say I'm sorry to his wife, and seeing that, you know. And when he actually did, and there was a healing, and they all got together and had a dinner and a whole bit, and it was, and I think that with a lot of the people that went to Vietnam, if they could do that, go over there and see how they feel about it too, and then there'd be a lot more healing. And I find it kind of strange too that you know, our enemy during World War II, they were one of the ones that said, we won't fight in this war in Iraq.
Which enemy are you referring to?
Yeah, Germany.
Right.
Germany.
So it's just, you know, going back to the,
Japan is very much anti-war too.
it really fits in with, the folk singing from the sixties, where the warmongers each believed they had God on their side, how they sung about Russians, Germans, and ourselves, each hating the other, pointed out the irony of each one being right, and finally gently denounced the concept of war. Well, today, we can hearken to the words of Casey about Passion Week and draw from some strength from that related to the events that are so harrowing in our world. You are made strong in body, in mind, and soul, and purpose by that power in Christ. And by that he means that spirit of justice, of peace, of compassion that's within each one of us. The power then is in the Christ. The pattern is in Jesus. And with that power, we say today, we shall overcome. And we thank you.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful.
And
I feel like I want to, run out and all the people who weren't here and say, you missed a great Sunday. All Sundays are great Sundays. And one of the things for those who aren't aware, when you make a donation today to the church, if you're not giving us a check, if you're giving us a check, that's fine. But if you're giving cash, please take one of the little envelopes and put your name on it. If you're not making any donation, that's fine. Take an envelope and put your name on it. Because if you have attended 15 services by November 21st, we are going to the Harrow Dunes, and it only costs you $25 to go Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at noon. And we're going to be, the Center for Creative Living is going to be taking care of all the food and everything else. So I also brought in a sheet today that shows people and how much attendance, and we do not have the records for the middle of January to February. So now you are being put on your good honor system, yes. And you can look at it and say, oh, I attended every one of those Sundays, and let's see, if I attended every one of those Sundays, I was there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Well, we're gonna let you decide what you want to do. And so this is a good way to play catch up, I guess. We have, the little zero does not mean you weren't here. That's our way of saying yes, you were. So look, if your name's not here, write it on the side, write it on the bottom, whatever. And know that this is going to be a way for you to get credit for having attended. And it's our way of being so excited about having Sunday celebration, okay? And so if anybody needs a little envelope, they're right there. Now, another thing is that each Sunday, we're here for you. And we want you to know that if you need a place to go, if you're going through a rough time, please call the office. Don't wait until Sunday. Give me a call. I don't know what happened last week. As I said before Friday, I had 3 people call me who were in the process of taking some kind of pills. They didn't want to be here anymore. And so what I did is I started talking to them and got them so that they were ready to let go of that midnight of the soul, where they're ready to start looking at life a little bit better. And that's what your church is here for. We have so many healers here. We have Reiki healers, we have psychological healers, we have spiritual healers, we have physical healers. We have people who do massage and people who do remote help. So please, if you're going through a rough time, don't feel you have to do it all alone. Many of you get into a depression and you just retreat. When you get into a depression, come here on Sunday, okay? Don't sit and let it eat you up, because everybody I know has sometime had one of those. We're here to help you. Don't forget to ask for hugs if you need them. Please know that we're not here to tell you you've got to come and give us $100 every week. We're here to say we want your presence here, okay? This is less about money and more about spirit, and we want you to join us. Any other announcements that we have right now? Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, I have a request for ongoing prayer. You know, Lavona Stillman, the past president of our church, has been greatly challenged by health. Lavona's in her 80s now. And she developed pneumonia earlier this year, around the first of the year, and was hospitalized for it.
and then was subsequently released, and I think she's been hospitalized 4 times, back and forth. She's very frail, and I think that she may be choosing whether to go or to stay at some level. I think she's even spoken of it consciously. But regardless of her truth, prayer, of her choice, excuse me, I think our prayers for her should be for her highest good. She feels that there's some work that she hasn't finished, and if her health and vitality was strong enough for her to do that, she would be most anxious to fulfill that work. If she's unable to, and her suffering continues to become greater and her vitality lesser, it would be a blessing for her to be released in the most powerful and beautiful energy in which that could happen. So her name is Lavona Stillman. She's the past president of the Universal Church of the Master. Many of you know her by sight or have seen her at these services. Just hold her in your prayer until she no longer needs it.
Is there anything we can do with the work that she's doing, that she needs to do?
You know, it's a lot of writing work, and if she were strong enough to be about it, I think people would help her, you know, and she could find people to do that. I don't think she's physically strong enough. She's so challenged to undertake that right now.
So she couldn't just talk it into a recorder or something like that?
No, she'd have to relive it if she did that.
She'd have to what?
Relive it. When people tell a story, they live on it.
No, I mean, some of the work that she's doing.
And that's a good question, and I don't fully know the answer, but I do know that she's pretty frail. And that's going to be very difficult to take on a challenge of that magnitude.
Just maybe a little, she's doing the best she can.
Yeah, right.
Oh, yeah.
Or should you get stronger, that's definitely would be.
I'd like to ask for prayers for our daughter Megan. We don't see her, and it's been months now, and we would like to see her again. Tom suggested releasing her to God, and I would just like to be strengthened in doing that and sending her there. And her name is Megan Althea Fott. She's in San Francisco, and we would just like to put her in the hands of the Creator. I also want to announce I have a Wise Women's class that meets in my home on Thursday nights. There are good things here too, so if you have a break from what Dottie's doing. And also I'm teaching creative writing in the community Tuesday morning, Thursday morning, Tuesday nights, and some of those classes are free, the community classes. I do intuitive readings, and Kathy and I will be singing and speaking again on Born in Berkeley book at the Campbell Library on Wednesday night, the 23rd of this month. It's a free fun talk if anyone wants to come. We'll also be at, I think, Los Gatos, Willow Glen coffee roasting at the end of May, and I'm sharing some of these things in the community and invite you all to come. Hopefully each time will be a little bit different.
And how much is your book?
Oh, thank you. The book is priced after the year of the Summer of Love, 1967. Tax and original art. So author will sign. If you'd like to get a book today, we have some here.
Yeah, I was gonna walk over. I was waiting for everyone to come.
Okay, now walking, you want to eat one? Okay, never mind. Here we go, and here's a pencil. Sally?
Oh, well, I've got 2 Dotties, yeah, Sally.
Oh, I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but I was watching a television program yesterday, and the final thing the lead actor says was, "Take the leap, Lynette will be there for you."
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, it kind of gave me goosebumps. So I don't know if that has anything to do with your talk, but I just thought I'd.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing.
Thanks for that message.
Yeah, Sandy.
I appreciate it.
I have the new UCM Quarterly magazine. Those of you who are UCM members, it's in the mail, but there are some people here who aren't part of UCM, and I have more in the car. I don't know why I didn't bring them all. I thought I did, but if you'd like to have a copy of our new magazine, I'd like to offer that to you.
That's so wonderful, because that's gonna help people know what Universal Church is.
Sure, and all the articles in here this time are written by UCM ministers, so there's quite a wide group of people, and some very interesting articles. Bea, who you probably see here on occasion, is the editor of this magazine, and she just keeps getting better and better. And I keep saying, this is the best one yet, so it is a good one.
She's a professional.
The man on the cover, this is John Lawrence, who made his transition earlier this year, was the vice president of UCM at one time, and there's some beautiful tributes that we received in the office about him. And partly contributed by Tom, who went to his memorial and represented all of us at his service. So I have them here,
How often do those magazines come out?
3 times a year.
Because I haven't gotten one yet.
Really?
And I've been a member since last year, so.
Okay, well,
Give her your address.
yeah.
Oh, they have my address because I get the mail from them all the time. But I haven't gotten any of the magazines.
You're gonna get one today.
You can have one today, and then you should get one in the mail. We send them both mail, so if you move at some point, here, I'll do this later.
They don't.
It might not, if they don't get forwarded, so if we had you at it, if you moved at any time, and it depends on when you, I don't know, I'll have to look.
Yeah, because I've been at the same address for the last year, so.
They're gone, huh?
Yeah.
Also, if you haven't, if you have email and you haven't received a joyful noise, let's send you.
Oh, and just, I was gonna talk to Garry about this too, but the email, you're only gonna get one next week, because Heather and I are both gonna be out of the office, and so you're gonna get a joyful noise early next week, and then you're not gonna get one the next week, so it's gonna be a 2-week issue.
2-week issue, oh, great. Also, we have over here, please check out, we have things about the workshops and the classes that we do here. We have flyers for C.I.G Candy. We have flyers for Lynn. This community, this UCM community, is so full of interesting things. Please try and get more connected. And Joyful Noise, we're trying to put more things in there for people to read about what's coming up, so that they'll be aware of what's going to be happening, okay?
I have to say, I love that joyful noise.
Oh,
I do send it to my girlfriend.
Oh, great, well, instead of sending it to your girlfriend, you can just email Sandy and she'll put it on there.
If you give her, or if she replies to us, I'll send you to staff at UCM and say she wants to get on a subscription list. We'll add her name, then you don't have to forward it. I mean, you can forward it if you want to, but.
Yeah, because I have to call her and tell her I emailed. Because,
She doesn't check her email every day, huh?
no, she very rarely checks
Okay,
it.
well, thank you so much for the input.
Any other announcements? You had any announcements at the end today? Anybody else have anything that they want to announce?
Anything coming up?
Oh, May, we have a big meeting in May.
Are you sure
You
you
have
have
a
We have our annual meeting, which will be here on the 17th of May, and a luncheon, and then we're gonna have some ordinations in the afternoon. And then the board is doing the Sunday service on the 18th.
We should,
Who's doing ordination, or who's getting ordained?
hopefully Corky with her.
Oh, okay.
She just has to go paperwork in.
Well, I have a lady who's one of the Vona students from Texas who has desperately wanted to connect with UCM people, and so she's flying in to come to the meeting. And that originally started to be her ordination, and then some other people have gotten included. I have a gentleman coming down from Sacramento. Some of the paperwork isn't quite finished, so I don't want to give names out and then have something happen where they don't either complete something that needs to be done. But a gentleman from Sacramento, and then I was told the other night that there's a student of someone who's about ready to get their licensure papers, and there's another one who's not sure she wants to do it in such a public area, and another one that's almost ready. So lots of almost ready, so I'm hoping we'll get over the hump. So possibly 3 licentiates and possibly 4 ordinations.
Yeah, we have 3 ordinations coming up after that in my class.
That's great. I think Corky's probably had the longest break in between when she's
Right,
doing
and I was going to say that I thought, John Lawrence originally sponsored her, this
Yes.
gentleman on here, and I thought, well, she'll probably be the last student, but I got a call from a lady in San Diego who has been very ill, but he sponsored her, and her health is better, and she's looking to kind of continue her work. Excuse me. So I don't think Corky's going to be the last one.
I said to Corky, said, well, I studied with UCM. And they said, really? And they looked it up, what, 22 years ago?
Yes, I think.
When we were talking about a long time, I mean,
We're talking a long time.
I'm not like,
That was right, was what?
25 years ago.
seem like a piece under?
Were you going to do any, spiritual message?
Oh, messages, I hadn't planned to, but I'm happy to, actually.
Okay.
Why not? If you have the time.
Just one more
Oh, yes.
announcement is next Sunday, those who come, there'll be breakfast afterwards. We're having an Easter breakfast after next Sunday, so.
Oh, Easter Sunday. Easter Sunday, yes. Do you think we could all wear bonnets or something?
You could.
Where Easter dresses, I mean.
Yeah.
I'll pass them.
You're not gonna wear, you don't have a fedora you could wear?
That's right, because we should say that Mary's doing service.
Mary Mary told me.
That's right, but I at the last moment,
No, Mary and Mary.
yeah, Mary is doing it because I was called out of town. There is a conference in Tucson sponsored by the Academy of Future Science, and I'll be there, but my energy and those of the other fellow UCM ministers that will be with us will be linked up with the people here at the center, so.
So
Be here in
actually,
spirit.
Janet Childs is gonna come and play her music to help her.
That is wonderful. I want to quickly, for those of you who remember Norm Breen. Now, is
yes.
Norm Breen still dating the lady that he was with?
No,
No.
but he's still living there in Tucson.
Well, because I got a call from a woman who's 74, and she is a spiritual lady, and she wants to move to Tucson. And asked me if there was anybody I knew that she could possibly get in touch with when she got to Tucson. And I said, "Are you single?" And she said, "Yes," and she's very bright and excited on the phone. And so I gave her Norm's. And so she wants to move there, but she doesn't want to do it without knowing somebody there.
Right.
So if you see Norm,
I will.
say, you know,
I'll talk to
we've got this woman who's very interested in getting in touch with him, yeah. Well, he's such a dynamic.
He really is.
He really is.
I know, what a great person to introduce her to, yeah.
So we can do messages today or save some for Easter if it's, anybody has planned, or whatever you'd like to do.
Anybody have any questions they want to ask spirits? Okay.
I had an announcement.
Yeah.
My sermon's on May 4th, manifestation. So,
Wonderful.
And this is gonna be
Wonderful
your first sermon since you've been ordained?
well, I haven't been ordained yet.
I thought you were licensed.
I was licensed yet.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's why you had the title minister.
That's right. That's okay, it'll be REV at the end of the year.
Sorry, May 4th,
Maybe we're
May 11th.
complete for
May
today,
11th.
and then, can offer, if it fits with what you're doing, Gary, could offer messages next week, I don't know,
Yeah,
you fit in. Yeah, so you could have them, it should be great.
And please tell your friends to come in. Easter Sunday is a time to be here. Can I quickly give one little thing that we did, did we do a curse of squirrels last
Oh,
Sunday?
that was, yeah, last Sunday.
I think this is the cutest joke about this place where they had all these squirrels running around.
Oh.
And there were the three churches, the Presbyterian, the Methodist, and the Catholic. And for the Presbyterian church, they decided, well, they wanted to do something. So what they would do is they would just kind of bless the squirrels, you know, they shouldn't really hurt them or whatever, and kind of talk to them. And the Methodists decided that humanely they would remove the squirrels from the area. And then 3 days later, the squirrels were back. And what the Catholics did is they made the squirrels members of the church, and they baptized them, and then they never saw them except on Christmas and Easter. So we don't want you to feel that way, is if you start to become a member of the church, you only have to be here Christmas and Easter. But we'd like you here Easter, because Easter Sunday is also the anniversary of this church. And so that's why it's a big day for us.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So,
Plus there's breakfast.
and breakfast. What can we do to help, Mary?
I don't know.
Let the spirit move you, it'll probably turn out all right.
Well, you mean about the food or about the service?
Food, oh, yeah.
Bring it.
The food.
Or anything.
Yeah, no, the food. Corey and I haven't finalized it because I have Corey.
Oh, then you don't need much help. I mean, you got.
We can bring a little extra
When you have
something
Corey,
if you
you
want.
just surrender to Corey, and
Yes,
Corey
yes,
makes
yes,
it all.
yes. Okay, good. Well, you guys are ready to leave. I've got a 1 o'clock wedding here today, so I'm just kind of hanging on. All right.
Congratulations.
Oh. This is one of these things today that all ministers have to go with. This woman called me on Tuesday and said, "Women's as soon as you can marry us."